In this lesson, we'll solve multi-step linear equations. To do this, you want to begin by simplifying each side of the equation as much as possible, by combining like terms on each side or distributing if possible. And then you'd want to isolate the variable as much as you can by using the addition and multiplication properties of equality. Let's begin by solving number 1. The equation 9 plus 5x equals 24, and we want to solve this for x. So to find out what x is, we want to first isolate the variable term, which is 5x, by doing the inverse of adding 9, which would be to subtract 9 from both sides of the equation. So we get 5x equals 15. Now to get x by itself, we want to divide by 5, because that'd be the inverse of multiplying by 5, like it currently shows. So x is now by itself, we call that isolated, and so we found that x equals 3, and we found our solution to the equation, 3. And if we wanted to check to make sure that that works, we would evaluate the equation by plugging in 3 to the original equation and making sure that the equation is true. And we would see that it is in this case. Let's look below this and do number 2. Number 2 says 2 times x minus 8 equals 10. Let's begin by distributing and simplifying as much as we can here on each side of the equation. So we get 2x minus 16 equals 10. Now, since there's nothing more we can do on each side of the equation, let's begin to isolate our variable. We do this by adding 16 first to isolate the variable term. So 2x will equal 26. And then we divide by 2. So to the right here, x will equal 13, and we found our solution. Our solution to the equation is 13. For number 3, again we want to isolate our variable. Now there's nothing more to simplify on each side, so we need to do the inverse of having a positive 13, so we subtract 13 to begin to isolate our variable. When we do this, we want to make sure we bring down our negative n. This negative sign hasn't gone away, so we bring that down. So our negative n equals 54. Now we can think of this as a negative 1n, so n is still not isolated. And so in order to isolate n, we need to divide both sides of the equation by negative 1. And that means that n will now equal negative 54, and that's our solution. So we'll put that in our set builder notation. And now for our last equation, x plus 5 plus 3x equals negative 41. We actually have like terms that are on the same side of the equation. So we want to begin by simplifying the equation by combining these. So we'll get 4x plus 5 equals negative 41. And now we can start to isolate our variable. We would subtract 5 to get the variable term by itself. So 4x equals negative 46, and we'll divide each side by 4. So x is going to equal negative 46 over 4, and 4 doesn't go evenly into 46, but this fraction can be simplified. So x equals negative 23 over 2. And so that's what our solution is. Negative 23 over 2 is the value that would make this equation true. So that's our solution. Finally, you can have equations with variables on both sides of the equal sign. So we still want to do similar steps, but we have to make sure that we combine our variables on opposite sides of the equal sign using the addition and multiplication properties. So let's look at 2 examples. Our first example, we want to simplify things as much as possible on each side, but there's nothing to do on each side of the equation. So we want to combine our 5n and our 2n. And again, since these are on opposite sides of the equal sign, we need to make sure that we subtract 2n from the right side, and we do the same thing to the left side. Always combine your variables first. So we'll get 3n plus 4 equals 13. And now we went from an equation that appeared to have 2 different variables to only having 1. And so now we can isolate that variable. We subtract 4 from each side, so 3n equals 9, and divide by 3 to get n equals 3, and 3 is our solution. For our final example, there's actually a lot of simplifying that has to happen on each side of the equation before we can begin to isolate our variable. So let's distribute the 4x plus 24, carry down our minus 8, and we also distribute our negative 5, minus 5x, and that will become positive 45. Before we start moving things on each side of the equation, let's combine like terms that are on opposite sides. So our 24 minus 8 combines to give us 4x plus 16, and our 7 and positive 45, when we combine those, gives us a positive 52. Now we're at the point where our x's are on opposite sides of the equal sign. So I want to combine my x's, and this time I'm going to add 5x on each side, so I end up with a positive 9x. I could have subtracted 4x from each side, but I prefer to work with positives, so I added 5. And now we're down to just 2 steps left. We subtract 16 from each side of the equation, so 9x equals 36, and when we divide each side by 9, we get x equals 4. And so 4 is our solution to this equation.